Here's every single philosophical idea explained so simply that even a 5-year-old can understand. Philosophy, with all its hypotheticals and isms, can be very overwhelming. But behind these ancient thinkers and their fancy words, all philosophy is doing is two things: trying to understand how the world works, and suggesting how we can live better in it. There are so many different schools of philosophy, and I'm going to do my best to try and explain most of them. Cynicism. This ancient Greek philosophy was founded by Antisthenes, a student of the famous philosopher Socrates. It advocates for a life of simplicity, virtue, and freedom from societal conventions. That sounds a little broad, doesn't it? Well, let's dig a little deeper. We're all used to thinking of cynicism as a negative thing in today's world. However, the philosophy of cynicism is anything but. It tells us to live in sync with nature. Nature isn't just trees and oceans in this case, but the ebb and flow of human nature. Cynics trust their instincts rather than adhering to what society wants them to do. Cynics strive to achieve virtue, which they define as living a self-sufficient, ethical life that isn't achieved through superficial desires, but through reasoning and discipline. Basically, they want us to get rid of any focus on money, possessions, and status, instead finding value in ourselves rather than material possessions. The famous cynic Crates of Thebes exemplified this when he gave away his wealth to live a life of simplicity and virtue. This kind of anti-materialistic behavior leads cynics to be deeply critical of institutions and traditions like politics and religion. To a cynic, these institutions are corrupt and can lead us away from that virtuous life we're supposed to strive for. Cynics practice something called Aestheticism, which means living with only what we need. So instead of opting for that Dyson hair wrap or a completely frivolous sports car, stick to the basics: a few pairs of clothes, minimal home decor, and affordable transportation. With extra material items out of focus, cynics believe that we can achieve true personal freedom, which is central to the cynic philosophy. If we are dependent on things, then we cannot be independent and free. Another practice key to cynical philosophy is shamelessness. This practice is perhaps best illustrated by none other than the behavior of one of the more well-known cynics, Diogenes of Sinope, who lived from 412 to 323 BC. He engaged in acts simply to shock others and expose the hypocrisy of societal norms. Apparently, he urinated on people who insulted him, defecated in a theater, masturbated in public, and gave people the middle finger for no reason at all. He wanted to provoke people to reflect on why they found these acts so offensive. One of the key goals of being a cynic is self-mastery, which allows you to be unaffected by external circumstances. So if we look at Diogenes' unconventional behavior, we might see that he was, in fact, completely unaffected by the external circumstances around him and did whatever he wanted to prove how frivolous our expectations of each other are. Diogenes also pushed the envelope when he reportedly lived in a large jar or barrel, owning very few items and mocking those who pursued material wealth. While this kind of stunt might be considered performance art in today's world, he was trying to show that true freedom comes from mastering our own desires. He believed that material wealth enslaved people and prevented them from true happiness, and he took it to the extreme. When he saw a boy drink water out of his own hands, Diogenes got rid of his only drinking cup, because why use a cup when you can use your own two hands? We think of the word cynicism as something negative and skeptical. To be a cynic is not necessarily something to be proud of, but the original philosophy was about something much more positive and aspirational. Sure, it had some crazy followers like Diogenes, but we can reframe our interpretation of cynicism and see it as a philosophy that insists on simplicity in order to find freedom. Cynicism had a major impact on philosophy and influenced other belief systems like Stoicism, which also emphasizes self-control and living in accordance with nature. Stoicism. This is a philosophy that originated in ancient Greece in the early 3rd century BCE. Its founder, Zeno of Citium, studied ancient authors like Socrates. Stoicism, similar to ancient cynicism, teaches us to live in harmony with nature and practice self-control. Nature, to the Stoics, is the natural order of the universe. We've all heard people say, it's in the universe's hands. This is a Stoic idea, that there is so much beyond our control, if we try to resist it, we'll never achieve virtue and freedom. To Stoics, there are things within our control, like our thoughts, actions, and choices, and there are things that are out of our control, like external events and the opinions and actions of other people. These two elements, what they call the Dichotomy of Control, lay out simply what we should be focusing on, the things we can control, and the external factors we should let be. Encompassed in this dichotomy is the idea of Amor Fati, or love of fate. Stoics embrace whatever happens and see challenges as opportunities for growth. They believe this attitude fosters resilience. Sometimes they'll even contemplate the worst-case scenarios to prepare themselves for potential hardship. In our everyday lives, this kind of contemplation could be a physical habit, like taking a cold shower to introduce ourselves to an uncomfortable situation on purpose. This way, when uncomfortable situations arise outside of our control, we feel prepared. Similar to not worrying about what we cannot control, Stoics focus on the present moment as opposed to being preoccupied with the future. If we ruminate about what might happen, we will miss out on what is actually happening right here and now. This fosters an interconnectedness with the rest of humanity, where we are able to feel and identify ourselves as part of a larger whole. Once we can do that, we will see that kindness, empathy, and a sense of duty emerge because we will feel truly in harmony with others around us. If we can master all of this, we might become virtuous. In Stoicism, there are 4 elements of virtue: wisdom, also known as good judgment; courage, which is being strong and brave in the face of adversity; justice, being fair and treating people with respect; and finally, we have temperance, which is self-discipline and moderation. It might seem overwhelming to achieve a truly virtuous and stoic lifestyle, but habits like journaling and identifying role models who stay present and move easily through life without anxiety or stress can be relatively easy steps to take. If Stoicism has a relatively positive connotation of living in the present and accepting the universe as it is, Nihilism might come across as a bit more negative. Nihilism. Nihilism rejects traditional beliefs and values. Nihilists tend to be skeptical about the existence of any objective truth or life's purpose. It tells us that life has no inherent purpose or value, and that any so-called meaning attributed to life is debatable and constructed in our own heads. Nihilism challenges that there is any absolute moral truth and suggests that any moral values we feel we have to adhere to are just constructs of our own mind and society. For nihilists, any sort of system like politics, religion, or cultural institutions are based on arbitrary beliefs. Who is to say that anything we believe is actually true? Since they don't believe in any sort of organized system, nihilists question authority and prefer to focus on individual freedom. In the philosophy of nihilism, individuals can create their own values and define their own purpose. This, in theory, is pretty liberating. We can be and believe whatever we want, but does that ultimately connect us with other people around us? Not really. Collective beliefs are often what binds society or even just a group of friends together. Nihilism can lead to feelings of despair or alienation, as its followers grapple with the idea that life lacks any sort of true significance. On the flip side, these kinds of feelings that provoke free thought can also inspire creativity and internal transformation. Nihilism forces us to look inward and potentially unlock layers of ourselves and our internal beliefs that we would have never found before. For example, a non-nihilist might state a fact like, the sun is shining and the birds are singing, therefore it is a beautiful day. Would anyone dare to disagree with this statement? Probably not. But a nihilist would ask, what is the meaning of beautiful? This kind of questioning linked to nihilism has often been co-opted by pop culture. Just think back to those multicolored shirts from Forever 21 that said, whatever. Whatever is a very nihilist attitude. It's basically saying, none of this really matters because none of it is objectively real. However, some notable people who embrace nihilistic ideas also reject the inherent negativity within it. Charles Bukowski, an iconic American poet, novelist, and writer, shared the nihilist perspective that life didn't inherently have any meaning. He also meshed that idea with dark humor as a way to cope with the idea. For Bukowski, if life had no inherent meaning, we might as well embrace the imperfectness of our present situation and not think too hard beyond it. A thinker from a much older generation, Friedrich Nietzsche, saw the inherent negativity of nihilism as an opportunity. For him, it was a way of thinking that we could pass through in order to create our own values. Nietzsche, who lived from 1844 to 1900, challenged traditional values and critiqued institutions like religion. He diagnosed modern society with a crisis of nihilism where traditional values have lost their meaning, but there's been nothing to replace them. He suggested a different type of nihilism that was more active. In this concept, we destroy our old value systems in order to create new ones. We don't just stir in a void of meaninglessness, we come up with something to put in it. Some might call this optimistic nihilism. Before we continue, if you'd like to know more about these philosophies or have a concise way to remember all of them and how they relate to one another, we've made something for you. This is the Aperture Philosophy Map. It's a poster that shows a brief explanation of all of the philosophies we've covered on this channel, along with how they all connect with one another. Think of it as a cheat sheet for understanding what these big ideas mean and how they can relate to each other. You can put this on your wall, your desk, anywhere. It's a perfect way to share your passion for philosophy with people around you, and it's such a great conversation starter. Plus, the design just looks really good. I personally love the colors. If you'd like to see the bigger picture in philosophy, or just want to support the channel, check it out through the link in the description. Now, back to our story. Optimistic nihilism blends the main idea of nihilism, that life lacks any inherent meaning, with a more uplifting outlook. For optimistic nihilists, even though life might not have any meaning, there is the opportunity to both embrace that sense of freedom and also come up with their own meaning. The first step in embracing this general idea is accepting the meaninglessness of life. In typical nihilist fashion, life has no purpose, but with an optimistic twist, that lack of meaning should feel liberating. It gives us the freedom to define our own goals and values. Once we do that, we're suddenly exercising all sorts of creativity and self-expression. It gives us the freedom to enjoy every minute of our lives without searching for some deeper meaning or purpose, but also gives us a sense of joy and curiosity. If we practice optimistic nihilism, we might find some inspiration in the vast meaninglessness of the universe. While run-of-the-mill nihilism can lead to isolation and despair, an optimistic twist actually encourages connection to other people. In this version of nihilism, finding community is an important element in creating our own values and meaning. Nietzsche outlined two types of human morality. One, master morality, which values strength, creativity, pride, and individuality. This is the kind of morality that optimistic nihilism strives for. And the other, which is slave morality, values humility, empathy, and submission. This kind of morality, which is more associated with traditional nihilism, usually comes from an individual feeling of resentment of people and institutions. Nietzsche argued that most people are dominated by slave morality and stuck in this nihilistic loop, unable to flourish and escape to master morality. Someone who is able to transcend into master morality and create their own values is, according to Nietzsche, called an Übermensch. In his eyes, we should all strive to be an Übermensch. Nihilism and its optimistic sibling are major players in the philosophical game. They've influenced movements like Absurdism and postmodernism. The ideas of nihilism appear in literature and art to contemplate human existence. But perhaps nihilism has had the most influence on existentialism. Nietzsche's emphasis on individual freedom and making our own meaning influenced existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. Existentialism is a philosophical movement similar to optimistic nihilism, which emphasizes our responsibility in creating meaning in a world that may inherently lack it. One of the main pillars of existentialism is that existence precedes essence. Okay, so what does that mean? As articulated by the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, it means that we as individuals are not born with a predetermined life purpose. Because of that, we have to define our own essence, which is our identity, values, and purpose. The mere fact that we exist means that we have agency over who we want to be. This freedom, though, comes with responsibility. Existentialism insists that we are free to make our own choices, which is great, but that means we bear full responsibility for who we are and how we behave. Existentialism can be very liberating, but it also forces us to take ownership of our lives. We cannot expect anyone or anything to step in and give us purpose. For some people, that might sound great. They want to take the reins and assert ownership over every moment. But for others, the responsibility of that can lead to anxiety. There are so many choices, how do we know which ones to make? If there's no inherent meaning, is my life a waste if I can't make the most of it? These kinds of questions can lead aspiring existentialists down a bumpy path. Another difficult point to grapple with in existentialism, or a high mark depending on your perspective, is that it values the individual over the collective. Each person has to navigate their own life and create their own meaning without relying on collective norms or support systems to do so. That kind of agency, void of any reliance on community, might be music to some people's ears, but for many, community and its influence is the very thing that helps define their life's purpose. As you can imagine, action is very important to existentialists. Thinking that you want to be a certain way or do a certain thing doesn't have much meaning. I could think or even say, I want to run a marathon, but that's far from actually doing it. If I wanted to employ some existential thinking to that idea, I would start training and eventually run the marathon, because I know that my choices and behaviors are what give my life purpose. Along with his nihilistic ideas, Nietzsche also incorporated some existential thinking and advocated for creating our own values in a, as he put it, God is dead world. Alan Watts, a modern-era British philosopher, writer, and speaker, was known for his ability to interpret Eastern philosophies for Western audiences. Although existentialism is not an Eastern philosophy, Watts focused on existentialist ideas like personal freedom, creating meaning, and confronting the absurdity of life. He frames life as a cosmic game, or a dance. The goal isn't to achieve something, but to engage in the process. His work blended these kinds of existentialist ideas with Eastern perspectives, which we'll get into in a bit. Albert Camus also wove existentialist ideas into his teachings, but his main focus was in the area of absurdism. His essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, talked about the tension between our search for meaning and the universe's apparent indifference to that search. This led to the absurd. The core idea of absurdism is that the absurd comes from the interaction between our own consciousness and decision-making and a world or universe that couldn't care less about what choices we make. Camus argued that even though this tension and the absurdity of it can't be changed, we can embrace it. Accepting the absurd means recognizing life's lack of inherent meaning without becoming hopeless. This is where absurdism differs from nihilism. Instead of surrendering to that meaningless, absurdism encourages defiance. It tells us to rebel against the temptation to seek false meaning or to entirely give up, especially when things feel very bleak. Merely living is an act of defiance against the absurd. Camus used the Greek myth of Sisyphus, who was condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for all of eternity, as a metaphor for human existence. Even though rolling a boulder up a hill forever, with no apparent destination, might seem useless, Camus liked to imagine Sisyphus finding contentment in doing it. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, he wrote. Absurdism would argue that apparent bleakness and living in defiance of it can lead to great creative breakthroughs. We are free to infuse our lives with only things that we create. If you've ever approached a creative project, you know that often the benefit of art comes from the process of making it, not the final product itself. You don't have to be a great painter to benefit from the freedom and expression that sitting down and painting can give you. The same sort of idea can be applied to life itself in absurdism. Mortality is an important element of absurdist thinking. Absurdism doesn't see death as a negative. It sees it as a call to live fully and in the present, to enjoy the process. Absurdism tells us to reject despair and practice defiant joy in the face of the darkness and meaninglessness. Writer Charles Bukowski created characters who lived outside conventional boundaries and pursued their desires unapologetically, rebelliously. And for him, as an author, writing was central to his survival and sense of purpose. He did not need to finish a single line, but instead managed to find creativity and purpose through the act of writing itself. "Find what you love and let it kill you," he famously wrote. Finding this sort of pleasure in life's purpose also brings in ideas from the philosophy of hedonism. Hedonism says that pleasure and avoiding pain are the primary motivators of human life. Therefore, its core ideas revolve around maximizing pleasure and minimizing suffering. There are two different types of pleasure. Physical pleasure is immediate sensory gratification, such as eating a delicious dessert or getting a relaxing massage. Mental or emotional pleasure is long-term satisfaction, joy, or intellectual fulfillment. Think of kissing someone you love or diving into a great book. These mental and emotional pleasures are more enduring and profound. Basically, when you think of hedonism, you can think of pleasure, pleasure, and more pleasure. Quantitative hedonism focuses on the amount of pleasure. More pleasure, regardless of its type, is better. Qualitative hedonism argues that some pleasures, like the intellectual and emotional ones I just mentioned, are more effective in avoiding pain. Avoiding pain is key to hedonism. In an ideal life, we transform necessary or unexpected pain into a manageable experience instead of suffering through it. The timing and duration of the pleasure is also very important. Immediate gratification can feel good and has its value, but long-term happiness and avoiding future pain should take precedence. We're often told to be wary of instant gratification, and most hedonists would agree. However, unlike cynical philosophy, hedonism rejects asceticism, the denial of physical pleasures. Hedonists believe that we all should be allowed to pursue the things that bring us pleasure, no matter if they are material or physical, if they make us happy. Instant gratification isn't always the most beneficial, but it certainly has its place. Some practical applications of hedonism could be practicing self-care. If you want a spa day, have a spa day. And if you're craving a hamburger, go get one. Savor connections with friends. Cuddle your dog. Listen to music. Even making your morning coffee every day can bring so much pleasure that you should take time to revel in it and make it a habit. Some hedonistic philosophies, however, place a lot of emphasis on moderation as we pursue ultimate and lasting pleasure. Epicureanism is one of those philosophies. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus advocated for simple pleasures and cautioned against excess. In the end, he warned that excess leads to suffering. Although moderation is a key piece of Epicureanism, it still aligns with hedonism in its pursuit of pleasure and the absence of pain as the path to happiness. The key difference with Epicureanism is that not all pleasures are worth pursuing. Some, in fact, can lead to greater pain or harm. Epicureanism also teaches that having any sort of fear of entities like God or death are major sources of anxiety that can hinder our happiness. Like Absurdism teaches that the universe is indifferent to our choices, Epicureanism is grounded in the idea that God is indifferent to how we go about our lives and, therefore, is not something to fear. Death, according to Epicureanism, is simply the end of sensation and consciousness, so similarly, is also something that we should not fear. All the happiness that we need exists in our simple pursuit of life. It comes from eating, finding shelter, and enjoying companionship. Anything overly luxurious can lead to dissatisfaction. Staying in a 5-star hotel might bring temporary happiness as you enjoy amenities and the view, but once you're back in your 1-bedroom apartment, does that hotel stay suddenly cut you off from finding happiness in the simple things in life? Instead of stays in 5-star hotels, Epicureans emphasize friendship over wealth or status. They also put a lot of value in the pursuit of knowledge. Understanding the natural world can help dispel fear and bring pleasure. These types of pursuits can lead to ataraxia, the Greek word for tranquility. One thing that Epicureanism says will definitely not bring tranquility is the involvement of politics and public life. These pursuits, it says, can be stressful and distract from our personal happiness. If you've turned on the news or scrolled through social media recently to read about current events, you can probably confirm this idea. Instead, Epicurus suggests being more private and spending time and energy on close friends and family. The good life, according to Epicureanism, is one that embraces simple pleasures, thoughtful choices, and meaningful relationships in order to find inner peace. If we embrace these, we can overcome fears and unnecessary desires to live a happy and fulfilled life. How? Try a gratitude journal and express thanks for the small things in your life that bring you joy. Find a community that you find encouraging and interesting. That could be a yoga studio, a writing group, a dinner party, or any other space that feels meaningful to you. If we take a step away from traditional ancient Western philosophies, we can find inspiration in someone like Alan Watts, who brought Eastern thinking into Western culture. He bridged the gap between traditions like Buddhism and Taoism and old-school Western thought. Watts was critical of Western materialism and consumerism. He wanted to help the Western world shift from a goal-oriented mindset to one that values the journey and present experience. Ironically, a lot of these ancient Western philosophies were already attempting to address that problem. But Watts found more freedom and influence in Eastern thinking on how to combat things that plagued Western society. Spiritual practices like Buddhism, which emphasize the importance of living in the present moment and embracing the idea that spiritual awakening is found in everyday life, resonated with him and ultimately with the Western audience that he taught them to. Buddhism was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, approximately 2,500 years ago in India. Buddhism is all about understanding the nature of suffering and achieving liberation from it. Buddhism contains the Four Noble Truths. Dukkha tells us that life involves suffering. It is inherent to existence. Samudaya suggests that the cause of suffering is craving, attachment, and ignorance. Nirodha says that suffering can be overcome if we get rid of cravings and attachments, which will lead us to liberation, also known as nirvana. And Magga says that the path to cessation of suffering is something called the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path is Buddhism's practical guide to living, development, and wisdom. The path is right view, understanding the Four Noble Truths, right intention, having good intentions of goodwill and harmlessness, right speech, speaking truthfully and kindly, right action, behaving ethically, right livelihood, earning a living without causing harm, right effort, cultivate wholesome thinking, right mindfulness, always be aware of the present moment, right concentration, develop deep states of meditative focus. As you can see from this path, Buddhism is all about rejecting anything that causes harm, while also cultivating thoughts and actions that benefit not just yourself but other people. It tells us not to harm other humans or living things, not to steal or lie, not to fall susceptible to temptations like alcohol or sexual misconduct. If we follow these basic rules, we will cultivate good karma. Karma refers to actions that have consequences on future experiences. Has anyone ever told you that's bad karma if you stepped on an innocent bug or sped dangerously through an intersection? They might be onto something. Buddhists also believe in a continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. This cycle is influenced by karma. One of the ways we can cultivate a Buddhist way of thinking and living is through meditation. Meditation is central to Buddhist practice since it helps develop concentration and mindfulness. Mindfulness simply means that we are fully present and aware in every moment. Buddhism is both a philosophy and a way of life. So how can we apply it to our everyday life? Meditation is the surest way to incorporate Buddhist ideas and practices into your routine. We often think, I don't have time to meditate, but we have time to scroll through our phones, to watch TV, or to do our skincare routine. Why not take 10 minutes out of your day to sit down, close your eyes, and breathe? If you really don't think that you have those 10 minutes a day, then you can try to integrate practices like right speech and right action into your life. Could the thing you're about to do cause harm? Is the thing that you want to say productive and kind? Asking ourselves these questions can lead us to live in a more Buddhist way. Alan Watts also celebrated Taoism, an ancient Chinese philosophical and spiritual practice with its roots in Lao Tzu and the foundational text, the Tao Te Ching. Taoism tells us to live harmoniously with the Tao, which in English is often translated as the Way. The Way is the fundamental principle that flows through all of existence. It is both the source of all things and the natural order that sustains them. If we can understand and align with the Tao, then we can live in harmony and balance. Sounds a little abstract, doesn't it? Well, here's how Taoists apply that to life. Wu Wei tells Taoists to act in harmony with the natural flow of things. It's not that we should do nothing, but we should avoid anything that feels forced and allow things to unfold naturally. You can think of this as trusting your instincts to not push anything into your life that doesn't feel like it belongs, whether it's a job, a partner, or a pair of jeans that you really want but just don't fit right. Taoism also wants us to live, think, and act simply. If we overcomplicate things, have too much ambition, or pay too much attention to material items, we're getting in our own way. We've all been there. Getting in our own heads or obsessing over a distant goal. That state of being never feels harmonious, and Taoists are all about harmony. Taoism recognizes the interplay of opposites represented by yin, passive and receptive energy, and yang, active and assertive energy. We all have both yin and yang within us. You might know people who definitely have more yang energy, who seem to be doing a million things at once, and you probably know people who have more yin energy, who quietly move through life, seemingly always relaxed. For Taoists, finding a balance between these forces is ideal. To achieve this balance, Taoism teaches 3 virtues: compassion, being kind to others; humility, avoiding being a know-it-all; and moderation, practicing restraint. Taoism encourages letting go of desires and the need for control so we can find freedom from the inevitable turmoil of worldly things. And like so many other philosophies, it encourages living in the present, not dwelling on the past or worrying too much about the future. Here's the kicker though, we can't fully grasp the Tao through rational thought or language. We have to experience it intuitively. How? Meditate and practice breathwork to find your inner calm. Tai Chi and Qigong are physical practices aimed at harmonizing the body, mind, and spirit. And Feng Shui, physically changing your environment to align with the natural flow of energy, can also lead to that elusive harmony. Taoism tells us to let go of rigid control and embrace spontaneity. So perhaps you can bring those ideas into your day, to let go a little bit. All of these philosophies are really aiming for the same thing: happiness and harmony. They all stress the importance of recognizing the natural world. They all incorporate art and creativity into their practices. They all rely on mindfulness and reflection. Even though they come from different thinkers and parts of the world, it's easy to see the link between so many of these ideas. The great news is that you don't have to choose just one to follow. Did any of these ideas resonate with you? Maybe you want to pick and choose which practices and ideas you incorporate into your own life. Ultimately, that's what these philosophers and spiritual leaders did. They found some teachings and feelings that spoke to them and pulled all of them together into a new philosophy. So, now's the time to be your own philosopher.